The heat was oppressive, the kind of July day that made the air feel thick, almost suffocating. I sat across from Emily, half-heartedly picking at my salad, the heat having stolen my appetite. The small cafe's awning offered little relief from the scorching sun, but it was better than nothing. Beads of condensation dripped from my iced tea, pooling on the table, and I dragged my finger through the moisture absent-mindedly. Emily sat back in her chair, sunglasses perched on her head, looking effortlessly put together despite the heat. She'd always had that ability, to remain calm and composed no matter the situation. I envied her for that. Right now, I felt like a bundle of nerves about to unravel. "So, David's back in town," Emily said, her voice casual but her eyes sharp, watching for my reaction. I froze for a moment, my fork hovering over my plate. She said it so plainly, as if it wasn't a bomb she'd just dropped on my world. David. The name alone was enough to set my pulse racing, a flood of memories crashing over me. "Yeah," I muttered, lowering my fork, pretending to focus on my food. "I heard." She raised an eyebrow. "And you're okay with that?" I shrugged, trying to play it cool, though the knot in my stomach said otherwise. "Why wouldn't I be? He's just another person who lives here now." Emily leaned forward, her elbow resting on the table, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "Rebecca, come on. It's David. Your ex-husband. The one you haven't seen in years. The one who—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. We both knew how that story ended. It was written in the scars I'd carried ever since our divorce. "I know who he is," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I sighed, letting the tension ease a little. "It's just weird, that's all. Running into him, or the idea of it, anyway. I haven't even seen him yet." "You will," Emily said, tilting her head to the side, studying me. "And when you do, are you sure you're ready for that?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I took a long sip of my iced tea, the cold liquid doing little to ease the fire in my chest. Was I ready? I didn't know. The last time I'd seen David, it had been in the midst of our divorce, a time filled with shouting, tears, and betrayal. The kind of pain that didn't fade easily, if it ever did. "I don't think I'll ever be ready," I admitted after a moment. "But what choice do I have? He's back, and I can't avoid him forever." Emily nodded, her expression softening. "You're strong, Rebecca. You've rebuilt your life. You don't need to worry about him." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that I'd moved on, that I was untouchable now. But the truth was, David's return had stirred something inside me that I thought was long dead. "It's not that simple," I murmured, more to myself than to her. Emily reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "It never is with exes, is it?" She paused, then asked, "Is he still with that woman?" "The one he—" I cut her off, not wanting to hear it. "No idea," I said, my voice tight. "And I don't care." But that wasn't entirely true, was it? I did care. Even though I hated to admit it, the thought of David with someone else, especially the woman he'd left me for, gnawed at me. Was she still in his life? Had she become his wife, the way I once was? Emily must have sensed my discomfort because she changed the subject, launching into a story about her kids and their summer antics. I smiled and nodded along, grateful for the distraction, but my mind kept wandering back to David. The memory of our last fight was still vivid, even after all these years. I could still hear his voice, cold and distant, telling me it was over. Telling me he didn't love me the way he used to. I could still feel the betrayal, like a knife in my chest when I found out about the other woman. "Rebecca?" Emily's voice snapped me back to the present. I blinked, realizing I'd zoned out. "I asked if you wanted to get dessert." "You look like you could use some sugar," she said with a gentle smile. I chuckled, though it felt hollow. "Sure, why not? Let's go all out." As Emily flagged down the waiter, I allowed myself to lean back in my chair, closing my eyes for just a moment. The heat pressed down on me, heavy and unforgiving, much like the weight of David's return. I wasn't ready to face him. I wasn't ready to reopen that chapter of my life. But whether I liked it or not, that chapter was about to be written all over again. The heat of the day lingered long into the evening, the sun hanging low on the horizon, casting a golden glow over everything. I sat in my small living room, the old ceiling fan doing little more than pushing the hot air around. The remnants of my afternoon with Emily still clung to me, the mention of David, his return, the sudden revival of memories I'd buried long ago. I curled up on the couch, a glass of wine in hand, staring out the window as the sky deepened into a soft orange. The stillness of the evening felt like a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. The memories of David flooded my mind with an intensity that caught me off guard, dragging me back to a time when everything had felt perfect. Or at least, I'd thought it was perfect. Our marriage had started like any other, full of hope, love, and promises. We'd been young, naive, and so in love. David had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the world. I remember the early days, when we would stay up late talking about our dreams, our future, and how we'd build a life together. I believed him when he said we'd always be a team, that we'd face the world together. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. His career as a lawyer had taken off faster than either of us had expected. Long hours at the office, late nights, and business trips became the norm. At first, I told myself it was just a phase, that once he was established, things would go back to the way they were. But that phase never ended. And then, there was her. I remember the night I found out. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, powerless to stop it. The cold, bitter reality that David wasn't just working late, that he was with someone else. I didn't want to believe it at first, even when the evidence was staring me in the face. But there was no denying it. David had been unfaithful. He betrayed me. The sound of my phone buzzing on the coffee table pulled me from my thoughts. I reached for it, half expecting to see Emily checking in on me. Instead, it was a name I hadn't seen on my screen in years. David. My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the screen, debating whether or not to answer. What could he possibly want after all this time? We hadn't spoken since the divorce. The last thing I needed was to reopen old wounds. But before I could stop myself, I swiped to answer. Hello. My voice was steadier than I felt. There was a pause on the other end, and for a second, I thought he might have hung up. But then, I heard his voice, deep and familiar, yet somehow different. Rebecca. It's been a long time. Yeah, it has, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of knowing how much his voice still affected me. What do you want, David? I didn't think you'd pick up. His voice had that same calm, measured tone it always did when he was trying to navigate difficult conversations. I've been meaning to reach out since I got back into town. You've been back for weeks. I didn't try to hide the irritation in my voice. You didn't think to reach out sooner. I wasn't sure if you'd want to hear from me. There was a slight hesitation before he added, after everything that happened. I laughed bitterly, though it felt more like a reflex than anything else. You mean after you cheated on me and destroyed our marriage? Yeah, I'm not exactly jumping for joy here. I deserve that, he admitted quietly. But I'm calling because, well, because I've been thinking about the past. About us. I never got the chance to explain. I cut him off, anger bubbling to the surface. What's there to explain, David? You cheated. You lied. You made your choice, and it wasn't me. I know, he said, his voice thick with regret. But it wasn't as simple as that. There are things I never told you, things I should have been honest about, but I was too ashamed. I'm not calling to make excuses. I just I wanted you to know the truth. About everything. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure what to say. Part of me wanted to hang up, to end this conversation before it dredged up more pain. But another part, the part that still had unanswered questions, the part that had never fully let go, needed to hear what he had to say. Okay, I said finally, my voice quiet. What truth, David? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him exhale, as if he was gathering the courage to say something difficult. I wasn't just unfaithful to you, he began slowly. I was unfaithful to myself. The person I became in those last years of our marriage. I didn't recognize him. I lost myself in the work, in trying to be this version of me that I thought you wanted, successful, powerful. But in doing that, I pushed you away. And when I realized how far we drifted, I panicked. That's when I made the worst mistake of my life. I closed my eyes, trying to process what he was saying. It wasn't what I'd expected, and in some ways, it made things worse. It was easier to blame the affair on something simple, like lust or boredom. But hearing that it was rooted in something deeper, something broken inside him, complicated things. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Because I need you to know that it wasn't your fault, he said. You were always enough, Rebecca. I was the one who couldn't see it. And I've lived with that regret every day since. The weight of his words settled over me, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. I had spent so long wondering what I had done wrong, why I wasn't enough for him. To hear him say those words now, after all these years, felt like both a relief and a new kind of heartache. David, I struggled to find the words, unsure of what to say. I don't know if that makes me feel better or worse. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said quickly. I know I don't deserve it. I needed you to hear that. For my own peace of mind, and maybe for yours. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, he replied. I just wanted to be honest with you. For once. The line went quiet, the unspoken words hanging between us. Finally, I broke the silence. I'm glad you told me. But it doesn't change what happened. I know, he said softly. It doesn't change anything. But maybe it helps us understand it a little better. I didn't know if that was true. But as I sat there, the memories of our marriage swirling in my mind, I couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, understanding was what I needed all along. The next few days passed in a blur of conflicting emotions. I had anticipated a quiet life after David left, a life where I could finally heal and move on. Instead, the weight of our conversation lingered in the air like a thick fog, making it hard to breathe. I found myself replaying our exchange in my mind, analyzing every word, every pause. Part of me wanted to pick up the phone and call him again, to ask more questions, to seek closure. But another part of me knew that reopening that door might lead to heartbreak all over again. On a warm Saturday morning, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. As I strolled through the local park, I was startled to see him sitting on a bench, his hands clasped together, gazing into the distance. My heart raced as I approached, unsure of whether to turn back or confront him. The decision was made for me when he looked up and met my gaze. Rebecca, he said, his voice soft, as if he were afraid to break the moment. David, I replied, forcing myself to sound calm. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the whirlwind of emotions swirling within me. What are you doing here? I came to think. About us, he admitted, shifting uncomfortably on the bench. I didn't expect to see you. Clearly, I said, crossing my arms over my chest. I felt a mix of anger and curiosity, unsure of how to approach this unexpected encounter. Is that all you came here to do? Think? He chuckled softly, the sound tinged with sadness. No. I was hoping to talk. I know it's unexpected, but I feel like there's still unfinished business between us. Unfinished business? I echoed, raising an eyebrow. What does that even mean at this point? David hesitated, glancing down at the ground as if searching for the right words. I think there are things we never fully addressed, things I didn't explain when we were together. I want to take responsibility for my mistakes. How can you take responsibility now? I asked, my voice rising with emotion. You made your choice, David. You hurt me, and it destroyed everything we built together. I know, he replied, his gaze earnest. But I want to own up to that, to give you the truth I owed you back then. I thought that moving on meant forgetting, but it's clear that isn't true. I'm still haunted by it, by what I lost. His honesty surprised me, chipping away at the walls I had built around my heart. I wanted to be angry, to remind him of the pain he had caused, but instead, I found myself yearning to understand his perspective. Okay, I said slowly, sitting down on the bench beside him. What do you want to tell me? He took a deep breath, his eyes searching mine. After the affair, I spiraled. I didn't just lose you, I lost myself, too. I buried myself in work, convinced that success would fill the void. But it didn't. The emptiness lingered, and I had to face it. I nodded, my heart softening a little. I get that. But you had a chance to be honest with me, David. You chose to hide things instead. That's what I regret most, he admitted. I thought keeping you from the truth would protect you, but it only made things worse. I pushed you away when all I needed to do was be vulnerable. Vulnerability was a foreign concept to us back then. Our marriage had been built on expectations, on presenting our best selves to each other. It felt strange to hear him acknowledge that now, years later. You weren't the only one who lost sight of things, I said quietly. I was so focused on being the perfect wife that I didn't speak up when I was unhappy. I should have fought for us instead of letting it all fall apart. Exactly, he said, his voice filled with conviction. I wish we had communicated better. I wish I had realized that losing you was my fault. It took me a long time to understand that. A silence settled between us, heavy with unsaid words and past regrets. I could feel the heat radiating from our shared history, and in that moment, I recognized the possibility of healing, not necessarily as a couple, but as individuals seeking closure. So what do we do now? I finally asked, breaking the silence. Do we just sit here and reminisce about our past mistakes? I'd like to think we can do more than that, he replied, a hint of hope in his eyes. Maybe we can start fresh, without the baggage. Maybe we can find a way to be friends. Friends? The word tasted foreign on my tongue. Do you really think that's possible? I do, he said earnestly. It's going to take time, and it won't be easy. But I believe we can find common ground if we're honest with each other. We owe it to ourselves to at least try. I considered his proposal. The idea of being friends felt daunting, yet strangely appealing. It was a step toward healing, a way to redefine our relationship without the weight of the past suffocating us. Okay, I said finally, my voice steady. Let's try. But if we're going to do this, we need to be completely open with each other moving forward. No more secrets. Agreed, David replied, a small smile breaking through the tension. I promise. As we sat on that bench, the summer sun sinking lower in the sky, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't experienced in a long time, hope. It wasn't a promise of reconciliation or a return to the way things were. It was the possibility of a new beginning, an opportunity to redefine what our connection could be. In that moment, the unfinished business of our past began to feel like a bridge to something new rather than a weight holding us down. The following week passed in a flurry of mixed emotions. David and I exchanged messages, tentatively navigating our new relationship as friends. I was nervous, excited, and scared all at once. The idea of spending an entire weekend together was both thrilling and intimidating. When David proposed the getaway, I hesitated but ultimately agreed, eager to explore the possibilities of what we could be. After all, we had a history that couldn't simply be erased. As the day approached, I found myself lost in thought, wondering how I'd feel seeing him outside of our usual context. The memories of our past were still fresh, but the prospect of rekindling our friendship was intoxicating. I prepared for the trip meticulously, packing a bag filled with comfortable clothes and a few items I hoped would make the weekend special. On Friday afternoon, I drove to the lakeside cabin David had rented. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the water. The air was filled with the sounds of chirping birds and the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. I took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill my lungs, and parked the car. As I stepped out, I saw David standing on the porch, leaning against the railing. He wore a casual white t-shirt and jeans that hugged his frame perfectly. He looked both familiar and foreign at the same time. My heart raced at the sight of him, and I felt an odd mixture of nostalgia and nervousness. "Hey," he greeted me with a smile that lit up his face. "Hi," I replied, my voice slightly shaky. He stepped down the porch stairs and took my bag from me. "Welcome to my humble abode for the weekend. I hope you like it." I followed him inside, and my breath caught in my throat at the rustic charm of the cabin. It was cozy, with wooden beams and large windows that showcased the stunning lake view. "It's beautiful," I said, looking around. "You did well, thanks. I figured we could use some time away from everything," David said, setting my bag down on the bed. "I thought we could just relax, enjoy the scenery, and maybe have some deep conversations." "Deep conversations?" I smirked, raising an eyebrow. "Sounds like a plan." He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "I mean, we've got a lot to unpack, right? But I promise, we can have fun too." "Fun sounds good," I replied, feeling more at ease. "What did you have in mind? How about a boat ride? We can rent a kayak or a paddleboard and explore the lake," he suggested, his eyes brightening at the thought. "Kayaking it is." I agreed, already imagining us gliding over the water, free from the burdens of our past. As we settled into the cabin, I felt the tension begin to dissipate. David's warm laughter filled the space, and I found myself laughing along with him. The ice between us was melting, and it felt good to reconnect without the heavy shadows of our history looming over us. Later that afternoon, we set out on the lake. The sun glinted off the water, and the soft breeze brushed against my skin. I climbed into the kayak with David, our paddles synchronizing as we ventured further from shore. "This is amazing," I said, glancing back at the cabin, now a distant silhouette. "I can't remember the last time I felt this free." "Me neither," David admitted, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I've spent too much time caught up in work and regrets. It feels good to be here with you." "Yeah, it really does." I met his gaze, feeling the unspoken bond between us growing stronger. "It's like we're rediscovering each other." As we paddled, we shared stories, light-hearted tales from our lives since the divorce, reminiscing about mutual friends and favorite places we used to visit together. Each laugh we shared felt like a step toward healing, and I began to see the man I fell in love with all those years ago beneath the layers of hurt and time. After a couple of hours, we returned to shore, laughing and splashing each other playfully. I realized how much I had missed moments like this, the camaraderie, the easy flow of conversation. "Want to help me grill some dinner?" David asked, wiping the water from his face. "Sure, as long as you don't burn it," I teased, playfully nudging him. "Hey, I can cook," he protested, feigning indignation as he led me back to the cabin. As we prepared dinner, I felt a warmth in the air, a camaraderie that was both comforting and exciting. We worked together seamlessly, chopping vegetables and seasoning the meat as we chatted about everything and nothing. "You know," David said, leaning against the counter, "I've thought a lot about what we discussed the other day. About my mistakes and how I want to be better moving forward." "I appreciate that, David," I replied, meeting his earnest gaze. "It takes a lot of courage to acknowledge your past and want to improve. I respect you for that." "Thank you," he said, his voice softening. It means a lot to me to have this chance with you, even if it's just as friends for now. Friends for now, I echoed, letting the words hang in the air between us. It was a fragile truce, but one I was willing to explore. After dinner, we sat outside on the porch, the sun setting in a fiery display of oranges and pinks. The air cooled around us, and David handed me a glass of wine. To new beginnings, he said, raising his glass. To new beginnings, I repeated, clinking my glass against his. As the evening unfolded, we shared stories of our lives, our hopes, and dreams for the future. I realized that the warmth I felt wasn't just from the wine or the sunset, it was the rekindling of our connection. But beneath the laughter, I knew we were still walking on the edge of a precipice, and the weekend was just beginning. Would this newfound friendship lead us to deeper feelings, or would it only unearth the scars of our past? Only time would tell.